No, still no.
Wow.
Morning, everybody. We're going to call our meeting to order. Economic Growth and Development, March 25th at 10:07 a.m. Looking for approval of the minutes of our previous committee meeting. We got a first by Mr. Bean and a second by Mr. Casito. Any comments or suggested edits on the minutes? I'll call the question. All in favor of approving those minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
That carries. Any public comment, privilege of the floor? Move forward with our action agenda. The first item is to designate our county planner as the certifying officer for the Community Development Block Grant Septic Replacement Program.
Just what you want, right?
Yeah.
Oversee septic.
I'll describe, so we received $400,000 through the Community Development Block Grant Program for septic replacements. As part of this process, we need to certify me as the certifying officer for the environmental record review. Fairly administrative formality.
Got a first by Mr. Wild and a second by Mr. Stroud. Any comments by Mr. Wild?
Thank you, Chairman. Ethan, how many households are we going to be able to help with 400,000?
This one's probably between 12 and 14. It varies between what the geography is. Around Lake George in the upper part of the county, you know, the depth of bedrock is not very much, and there's more challenging topography versus like Queensbury. We've got sandy soils. We could have more conventional septic system. So it varies on location.
So 12 or 14? That's all.
400,000?
Yeah, that's an estimate. Yeah, that's an estimate.
So what will we need to do it all?
All of the individual septic systems. Well, we requested through the Environmental Concerns Committee about a month or so ago, an additional 1.5 million from the DEC septic replacement program. We anticipate applying for additional CDBG funds this year. You know, we've got partners like Rebuilding Together Saratoga. They have funds for like senior households, emergency repairs. It's going to take, you know, considerable work over the next, 20 years. A lot of the septic systems are at the end of their useful life, having been, 30 years old plus. So this will be a long effort to bring all the septic systems up to compliance.
Thank you.
Mr. Castillo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is there a match? Or is it?
This one, no, not in this particular one. This is for low and moderate income household.
Low and moderate, okay.
Yeah. And so I encourage anyone, any resident, anyone here to look at our webpage online. We have a streamlined, it's a consolidated application. So our various programs, the Champlain Basin Program funds that the Lake Champlain, Lake George Regional Planning Board got for us, DEC program and the CDBG. It's one consolidated application that just sort of puts you in our system. And then our fiscal coordinator, Gina Martin, helps channel people in the right direction.
Mr. Bean.
Yeah, just a quick question as far as, is there preferential treatment depending on the age of system, proximity to fresh water? I mean, how do you go about, you understand? What
Yeah. So it depends what program you're using. For the DEC program, it's proximity to eligible waterways. I think Glen Lake was the one that was really not in there, which is a bummer. And then for the CDBG, it's low and moderate income households.
All right.
Any other questions? We got a first and a second. I'll call the question. All in favor of certifying Ethan as the certifying officer, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That carries. And our only other action item is permission to apply to the Municipal Parks and Recreation Grant Program.
Just real quick on this one, this is recently announced through the governor's office. It's a 90% state share, 10% local share municipal parks grant. It's a rare item where it's set up for, public parks, playgrounds, things of that nature. It's part of the Unplug and Play initiative from the governor's office. Great, get kids off phones. We're working with Teen and whether it be the fish hatchery or some other options for some county-owned facilities, but I would encourage any other supervisor here to think about projects that they have in the works on the local level. I know Luzerne, Chester, a few other places have been looking at playground projects, and we're reaching out to them, but please reach out to us for any assistance navigating this program. The deadline, it's a fairly quick turnaround.
May 2nd?
Yeah, May 2nd. So
And you can apply for, say, 500,000, receive 500,000 and use it for 10 different parks, municipal or county parks.
it's my understanding we did apply for
More than
individual
one project
projects.
for one, yeah.
Yeah, each application would be an individual
Oh, it
project.
would be.
Yeah.
We have a motion to bring this to the floor. First by Ms. Turner, second by Mr. Stroud. Any other discussion? Call the question. All in favor of applying for this grant program, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And that carries. Discussion items.
Okay, fairly briefly, I know that not everyone was here last month. But I think you've been paying attention since then. In terms of the comprehensive plan, we moved towards adoption. Thank you very much. So we're going to enter sort of a 2-month period where we're doing the requisite referrals to other municipalities and environmental review. And that'll be followed up by further Board of Supervisor consideration for the seeker process and final adoption, anticipating May. I guess I'll go directly to the second discussion item, which is the housing initiative. I think about 2 months ago now, we announced to this committee that we had put the finishing touches on our housing strategy for the 2025-2026 year. That's posted on our website. We developed this strategy to follow up on the housing needs assessment. We worked with Jim and various other county partners on this, but the 3 topics that came out of that were to actually have this convening to talk about housing on the county level, the task force. The second one was to continue technical assistance on the county and municipal level. And the third one was to continue our efforts on communicating and educating elected officials and residents about how housing issues are impacting our communities. I don't think everyone is on the same page as a lot of our elected officials and economic development folks are about how it's impacting our quality of life and just overall viability as a county. So in the spirit of moving that initiative forward, our first housing task force meeting will be Thursday, April 3rd. This is really targeting the entities that are already working in the county on various housing projects. I think since we really started talking about this in earnest at the county level about 2 years ago, there's been a lot of different state and federal funding opportunities. A lot of different organizations have started aligning their programs. I know, LDC and EDC have been hosting HCR, connecting developers with resources. You guys have developed a incentive program covering the soft cost for pre-development, and in our department has done various things as well. So we're bringing together people like Glens Falls Housing Authority, City of Glens Falls, to talk about, their efforts over the last few years and to understand, what their challenges have been in order to let them succeed at what they're doing. And then how do we actually use some of our resources to remove the barriers for their successes? This is an approach that we think is pretty, we hope it will be a strategic use of resources because it's going to take advantage of all the funding sources that are already coming out, as opposed to creating a brand new entity on the topic of housing. We're basically just trying to align the resources that we already have. So that's our first of our 4 quarterly meetings for the Housing Task Force in April. And then also on this handout that I provided, you're going to see the second item, which is a new housing pipeline and scattered residential development dashboard. Supervisor Wild had brought up this point probably over a year ago now. We discussed the housing study, which was released in 2023. Lots of great data. This is data supposed to be used for developers to make decisions about investing in Warren County and for granting agencies to understand what our needs were. Recognizing that things are changing very quickly. Sarah has worked very hard on this with members of our planning staff and some other municipal partners to get a very clear understanding of what sort of projects have happened over the past few years. So we can take that 2023 data and needs, which are always changing, and sort of compare, sort of ground truth them and see where the progress is being made. We're hoping that this tool is good for elected officials, for residents, policymakers to understand, what's in the works, what's happened, what projects are working or not working. and maybe where we need to put some of our attention. I'll let Sarah take over from here and she can take us on a little drive through this dashboard.
Okay, so one thing I wanted to note, although there is a QR code on this flyer, I would very much encourage anybody who wants to look at this dashboard to do it on a desktop. It's a lot of information. It's hard to navigate on a phone. So you can get to this website from the planning website. The URL is at the bottom of the sheet. Just click on housing. It will take you to this housing website, which I think everybody has seen before. Our housing strategy is here on this link. So if you'd like to read the housing strategy and the accompanying housing action matrix, our department worked on with Labella and a variety of different partners over the course of 2024. That's posted here. The dashboards are in the housing data tab here. There are two of them. One is scattered residential. So this essentially right now is just using information from the real property tax roll. I showed this briefly a couple months ago, but it was still a work in progress at that point. But this is essentially where a single family, two family seasonal residences have been developed from 2020 to the present, well, through 2023. We're planning to update this annually after the tax roll is released each year. So we'll be updating this probably in May with the 2024 data, but this will allow you to search by municipality, get a sense of how many parcels have been developed in that time frame, what the median square footage is, what the median full market value is for those properties. And obviously this varies wildly by community. Median full market value of properties developed in Hague, it's over $1 million. So that's the scattered residential. The other dashboard is our housing pipeline dashboard, and I just wanted to give a huge thank you to Matthew Smith. He's the junior planner in our office, and he's spent hours and hours and hours compiling the data that has gone into this dashboard, mostly by pouring through planning board meeting minutes. So big thanks to Matthew. We have a plan in place. We've presented this to our group of local planning and zoning officials at the municipal level at our quarterly meeting last week. We intend to keep this up to date moving forward. So Matthew will be in regular communication with the planning and zoning staff at each one of the municipalities. But this is our multifamily residential pipeline. So we're hoping that this is really helpful, both to get a sense of what's coming, what's in the works, and how long it takes to get through the process. Again, this is filterable by community, and it's also filterable by project status. So we can see, what particular projects are proposed, what has been approved, what's been permitted. And this is going back to 2020 again, so we can see kind of what has been completed since 2020, and then also what projects have been tabled. So there's links to the meeting minutes where they're available, or the site plan where that's available. So yeah, and we've got a chart of number of units by municipality, the status of where each of those projects are. So we're hoping this will prove to be a helpful tool for everybody with getting a sense of what we've got in the pipeline, because we've got a good number of projects at this point, especially, in Glens Falls, Queensbury, Lake George.
Mr. Well.
Sarah, Ethan, it's great. That's what we have planned or in the works, but what is the ultimate goal? What's the need that we have, and what percentage of where we need to be versus what we have? coming?
Yeah, so that I think we also talked about a couple months ago. Very tricky. So we had the housing study, the consultant actually called every single so one metric for measuring that is what the waiting list is of these various different apartment complexes. And that's really a manual process that involved first go around the consultant calling every single one of the apartment complexes and trying to get information on their waiting lists. So we have attempted to keep that information up to date, but we have many, many, many unresponsive property managers. So that is the roadblock that we've been hitting with that project. So we have not quite figured out how to get better responses. But you know, being able to know how many people are on the waiting list for all of these units obviously is very helpful in helping to ascertain need.
And it's also a question too, for what market, there's need, because there's demand, and then there's need. I think we could say that there is always gonna be a pretty strong demand for second homes, vacation homes, luxury homes. I think you could build, you know, a lot of $600,000 to $1 million homes and sell all of them. But then you look at some of the long-term demographic projections about an aging population, and you realize, hey, we might need some other, you know, lower maintenance, easier access homes for our aging population. So that's, you know, more of a need. Then also in terms of like an economic development need, we need some housing for people that actually work in this third of our economic pillar, which is the tourism economy. So, you know, workforce housing, you know, there's been talks about seasonal housing for J1, H2B students. And that could change too. We don't know what happens with, you know, visa programs. What if something's disrupted with our pipeline of H2B, J1 visa holders? We need to focus on more, you know, less dormitory style housing and other, you know, year-round workforce housing. So those demands are shifting constantly.
We engage with them a fair amount on this. The study itself, depending, I mean, the 400 and some odd pages, you'll find numbers that range from 1,200 to more than 3,000, depending on the methodology somebody's looking at as a potential target base. But they're all lagging indicators. So they're based on open jobs and, as you say, waiting lists. And to some degree, the days on market and how that algorithmically plays out. One of the processes we go through with many of the communities that we engage with is we look at their schools and we look at their own comprehensive planning and where do they believe they need to be in order to have a sustainable long-term community. And those are not necessarily reflected in that data. So for instance, if we go to your community, you know, if we look at the number of open jobs and the waiting list on available housing units, it will never address the fact that that school needs a serious influx of additional families in order to be viable long-term. So there's a strategy that I think we got to develop with these guys that looks at both the near-term and the long-term indicators. But this is also disproportionately met by Queensbury and Glens Falls because of their proximity on one side of the line. And we also forget the role we play in the larger North Country housing market. Hudson Headwaters, as an example, a disproportionate number of people who do not work in Warren County live in Warren County and then base themselves from Warren County into the rest of the area because there is no housing available in the park. That's an example of something that we'll never get unless we somehow look for a larger data set. And also trying to figure out demand versus need. How would we prioritize that? Anything that's built near the line immediately fills up. And oftentimes with people who are not necessarily driving our economy from being employed in our community, but they are living here and they are spending money here. And so there's a multi-county need that we disproportionately fill. I talked to Gary Douglas about this because Plattsburgh has much the same role in where it is. And I think he's got his hands full right now with lots of other things, but we've talked about the idea of how would we start to develop some sense of how do communities like ours wind up playing a role in the park from a housing standpoint. One thing I'm certain of though, is that every housing development that's in your pipeline is either full at the time that they offer them or anticipates being full as soon as they open up. There's also this whole other sector, which is things that are not yet in the formal planning process, but for instance, we become aware of because somebody starts to talk to us about potential funding or support as they enter into the process. So we have some visibility to that. We try to provide some of that in our numbers, although oftentimes we can't fully disclose exactly what their intentions are.
Any other comments on housing? Ethan, Sarah, do you want to move on to grants?
Yeah, so I think I touched on the municipal parks and recreation grant. The other two, I mean, we're tracking a variety of different grants right now, but two of the primary ones, full board of supervisors endorsed our department pursuing Empire State Development County Partnership Funds for the wastewater treatment plant. We'll be submitting $1 million request next week for that program. Additionally, we're working with the town and village of Lake George to explore pro-housing community grants for a 400-unit plan unit development. And obviously, that project's got to go through the local approvals process, so the county's endorsement of an infrastructure project for it in no way supersedes the local decision-making process and site plan review. But we are looking at ways to support that. We've got both municipalities pro-housing certified. That opens it up for infrastructure grant eligibility. So we're having productive conversations on that one.
The $1 million one, we approved up to $2 million, right? There was some thinking that ESD might allow for a higher.
I think that the interesting thing there is that there's an additional pot of funding that the Lake Champlain, Lake George Regional
Right.
Planning Board is pursuing to support that project in addition to this $1 million county partnership program. And just a quick note on so I'm going back and forth between county partnership and county infrastructure grant. This is the one reason to support North Creek. Based on what we're hearing is that there will be another round of this program. So I'd encourage municipalities that have infrastructure and maintain infrastructure to think about this. You know, we're obviously tracking this through our capital inventory planning, but also just think about, and Jim, another good, as you have conversations with people that are interested in development, I think this program will be out again. So if it's an opportunity to extend a sewer main somewhere, you know, put laterals in, this is the kind of thing that we want to just have our ears to the ground on.
County Administrator.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, just to clarify, so our planning department, these are both Empire State Development grants, but there are two separate funding streams. Between the one our planning department is applying for 1 million and the one the regional planning board is applying for 2 million. And the outlook is pretty optimistic for both of those. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The second round of funding you mentioned.
Possible, yeah.
Possible, right?
Yeah.
That could apply to the Lake George project, hopefully.
I mean, so far it seems like it's been a good fit, so, yeah.
Okay, are they aware that possibly you come out?
Yeah, I mean, it's too
Really
soon to say where
Okay.
it's at, but I think all the work that project team is working on for the pro housing grant
Yeah.
is also applicable to this county
Yeah,
partnership.
we met with Joe and his team last week.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think what we try to do is to pick up the ball from wherever they have it and then make sure that whatever other needs they have or things that they aren't sure how they're going to address, we become aware of, and we can kind of work with you guys on that strategy. There were a number of things that they were looking for that might also include National Grid, for instance, and then we act as a liaison to sometimes engage them. So this is a really good tag team that's going.
Very good, thank you.
Mr. Bean?
Yep, just a quick question as far as the $1 million grant, is there a date that they think that will notification? Or as award or not award?
We have not been given
I'm just
a
curious.
deadline
Okay.
for announcements, but my understanding is that this one should be a little bit faster than some of the other consolidated funding application
I
programs.
think the one for Lake Champlain, Lake George, they're looking at a May
Okay.
1st notification. I think that's, if I understand correctly, from Beth and Jessica.
Okay,
I'm just curious.
yeah, not sure.
Wow.
Nate? Ethan, I'm just curious, this municipal funding, there's challenges that our sewer, our wastewater environment, so-called, that exists when people are trying to pump out systems. right? They have nowhere to go, really.
Right.
Is there some way we could do some consolidated thing and help and actually build a processing plant that would handle
Yeah,
this?
yeah, so the Lake George Village had identified, they'd done an engineering study, I think it was with CT Mail, and they identified a $4 million project to increase their septage handling capacity. I don't know what, I do not believe that the last application was successful during the 2024 round. 2025 round, there's still a lot of funding for clean water programs in the governor's budget. If that's a priority, I think it would be wise we can engage with Dan Baruch, Mayor Perry, about the viability of that project. Because septic hauling it's a big issue right now.
Just to follow up, in terms of the watershed, the
Mhm.
Lake Champlain north, right, and versus south, where the
Right.
line goes through
Right, yeah.
Queensbury and Lake George. So if we built something in Lake George, it would only handle the North Country.
So
per se.
there was some interesting conversation about, I think it was the Great Lakes Compact, where there's some fairly high level federal regulations about whether or not you can take water out of what is the Lake Champlain and Great Lakes Basin. But I don't know, and there's probably some lawyers that could speak to this a little bit better, whether or not septage is classified as a water withdrawal, right? I think the big fear was like, hey, we don't want to be piping fresh water out of the Great Lakes Basin, but it's septage water. I don't think that's been resolved. I don't know if you've heard about this, Jim, and you're
Well,
involved with clean water.
We have slated this exact thing for one of the projects of the reverse marketplace, which we hope to launch later this year, which is to identify this as a need and see whether or not we could fund a commercial entity that might step into the gap. What that would essentially do is open that entity up to direct funding from, say, Empire State Development on a commercial basis as opposed to a pure infrastructure basis. In that process, we've done some initial research about the regulations you're talking about, and it is not clear. And so we're going to continue to poke at it, but if it's not clear, then our object would be to say, maybe we come at this both ways, from both the municipality and a commercial entity. If they're pre-treating waste and essentially making that process easier for the waste treatment plants, there is a pathway that's associated with pre-treatment that is different than what we're talking about. So we don't have the answer yet either, but we're trying to figure it out. And I think this idea of figuring out, coming at it from both a municipal standpoint and potentially commercial standpoint will give us at least more knowledge and choices. There's no doubt that this is a limiting factor on how fast we can do the septic work, though. That is universal. Everybody
Right.
understands that.
Yeah.
And Glens Falls clearly has the same challenge on a different scale of how they're able to receive the septage, how it affects their process, and how that inhibits bodies of water that are in their watershed.
More to come.
Yeah, I mean, it would be advisable to be considering the fact that our DEC grant, the eligibility went from just Lake George, expanded across the county. I can anticipate, and I think there's already whispers of other municipalities considering, septic inspection on transfer or some sort of septic inspection program, because they're recognizing like the fail rates from the Park Commission program were pretty higher than anticipated. So it's like, okay, based on that, let's think about all the other water bodies in the county. So if other municipalities are considering any sort of inspection on transfer type laws, then of course, that's going to increase the demands on the septic haulers. So yeah, it's definitely a topic to track.
Anyone want to report? No. I had it as number 4 on discussion items.
Oh, I'm sorry, I
Is that
didn't hear
carried
you.
over?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, so I apologize. So last committee meeting, I did distribute the annual report. There's a little bit of confusion about whether or not this is included in the agenda. So I just wanted to put it on the agenda this month and make sure that everyone received a copy of our annual report. If you haven't, I have additional copies of it with me right here. Would you like a copy? Okay. And it is available online as well. Quite proud of our work. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. You know where we are. Our doors are always open. Great. So with that,
Well, let me just add, Jim, do you want, from EDC standpoint, do you want to give any standalone, aside from the planning department comments, updates?
Yeah, if you, is now the time?
Yep.
Okay, you wanna hand these out real quick? First thing I wanna tell you is that I don't.
Sorry, we didn't post it. Can we do it during privilege of the floor?
Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry. Okay. Okay, let's get it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So do we need to? John,
Wait.
clerk of the board is saying we can't hand that out. We can hand it out next meeting because we didn't post it with enough time.
Got it, okay. Yep. All right.
So we're not doing this?
Anything else from the planning department, Ethan, Sarah?
we have a lot going on, so but I will, I'll let you guys go. Thank you.
No referrals, privilege of the floor. Yep. Is it okay?
Yeah, I get to, can,
I'm waiting to see if I'm okay.
Oh.
Don't do the handout, but you can speak. Right?
I'll give you the handout next time.
Yes, yeah. Oh, I take the blame for that.
It's all right. It's a quick update. We try to keep you up informed, but the first thing I wanted to tell you is the work that we're doing in collaboration with the planning group is more aligned than I think it ever has been. And I want to thank Ethan and Sarah in particular, because they never move without engaging us to determine how we can do this best together and take advantage of work maybe you've already done and lever that. Broadband is an example of that. I think we're better when the two of us are working on that than either of us alone. But really, really fantastic teamwork with them. The economic activity in the county continues to grow, and we'll give you the numbers formally at the next meeting. But at every single month, we have between 3 and 5 net new inquiries, which could be a net new business that's exploring being here or an existing business looking to expand. We add to that list maintaining or sustaining existing businesses, and that total makes up our business activity. And we have never had a month in the last year where we have not had net growth from one month to another, and it's steady, so it's not seasonal. You'll get some of that data, and it applies in the ratio you would expect. 2/3 of it is in Glens Falls and Queensbury. The breakdown of it is roughly, it's not exactly a third to tourism, service-related work and everything else, but it's relatively close to tracking that. I did want to just update you on a handful of things that are important. You certainly know about the North Creek sewer. You will continue to hear from us to the public about how important this is to every single resident in Warren County. We've done a lot of economic analysis to determine that there is no greater opportunity in terms of growing the base of that particular sector of the economy and expanding the tourism season than the expansion of North Creek and its corridor to be a fuller scale partner in that. And wastewater is literally the limiting factor on how that can be realized. We communicate openly about it. I want to make sure you understand, as your advocate for the county, we speak on the voice of the economy. And you'll continue to see that analysis played out in the public wherever we believe that it helps. We've assisted Lake George as they finalize their DRI list, and we continue to act as a liaison to Empire State Development. I think this is going to be a net really positive thing for the county, and it will be the second flagship program that ESD thinks about. They've already come back to Warren County, to other communities in Warren County, looking to actively have Warren County continue to participate in the DRI process. Because their experience in Warren County has been so positive, not simply from a process standpoint, but from a leverage standpoint. I recently helped the city help them package where they stand on their DRI, and the leverage that's associated with the DRI in Glens Falls is the largest ratio of leverage that has been created by the DRI in the state. The $10 million that the state brought to the table, even though it was long in coming and sometimes a struggle, has produced nearly $50 million in total investment. That 5 times leverage factor is now the benchmark that the state uses as a target. we should all be proud of that, even though it was hard. I also want to talk a little bit about medical device. It's an important part of our economy, and in fact, I wanted to give you an update, particularly about Angio. We've been engaged with Angio since, well, we've always been engaged with them. They're a part of our community. They oftentimes are speakers at EDP events. Their transition from a purely legacy medical device company to more of a technology company has been something that we have tried to bring visibility to. They're a publicly traded entity that is playing in not only the traditional space, but a new space that they're creating. It took us all, you know, I don't know if by surprise, because they had been letting us know that some of their legacy products that are leaving intellectual property protection because their patents are expiring, and therefore their ability to produce those products at a sustainable profit was always going to be a challenge. They've been selling off some of those assets over the last number of years. Medline, for instance, which is in Glens Falls, is a former division, the original division of what was Navalis that became Angio. But the growth that they see and how they're going to manage that in other sectors has always been something we've wanted to participate in. When they made their announcement last year that they were going to essentially leave the manufacturing sector and largely leave Warren County, we engage with them in the way that an organization like us is uniquely positioned to do, which is not in front of everybody, but behind. Meeting with them regularly to try to figure out when is there an opportunity that we might be able to assist them or support them if they decided to change course. They did eventually decide that in the research that they went and did. They found that the opportunities to stay might be better than the alternatives that they were seeing for some of the things they were looking to outsource. But maintaining that relationship is really, really critical. They had already made the public announcement that they were leaving. They needed somebody to be able to work with them discreetly to determine, well, what if we didn't leave in whole, but not do that in the public's eye, because you don't know whether or not you're actually going to be able to commit to it. This is where an organization like us that can operate in that space is really important. For a number of months, John and I met with them, and eventually we're able to help them develop a business case that they were able to execute internally. And that led to essentially the retrenching of the organization at half of what its current footprint is. But importantly, that half is the sustainable half. Their workforce is mid-50s in its median age, which meant that they were challenged, just like everyone else, to figure out how they were going to sustain their existing operations. Essentially, what is going to remain here will allow that portion of their workforce, which has some long-term viability to it, to be able to continue to be engaged. In other words, the half that's under 55 is probably the principal amount which will stay. I wanted to talk just a second about what does that mean to us. John did some analysis on this, and we'll present this. We'll give this to you so you can enter it into the record next time. But their essentially pullback essentially turns them into a payroll of less than $10 million. But the impact by all conservative measures, and we used a number of different models and took the most conservative kind of amalgam of those various models, essentially says that impact is it's about $18 million in total to our county. That's a pretty significant effort to try to keep these guys from essentially setting up whatever they were going to do somewhere else. It's clearly a big thing to Queensbury, where they're based. It's still probably one of the most significant economic things in the county overall. The impact long-term to our tax base and to the ability, for instance, for us to fully leverage resources, for instance, like CDTA, where this is an entity that provides a connection for workforce that's coming from outside the area, is also important. It doesn't necessarily show up in this analysis. But the net of all of this is that them staying produced the effect that's larger than any other single business that we could have brought here. Once they went to zero and we got them back to 150, that's essentially as if we had created 4 or 5 of the typical entities that have come in here in the last 10 years. So when you engage with anybody, if you do, in the community with Angio, I would encourage you to be as gracious as you can, They did not have to do this. They had many other options. Once they had said that they were leaving, there were entities that were offering them an opportunity in other states and in other parts of New York. But obviously they have a history here, and I think they wanted to stay here, and I think that they have made a decision that we're all going to be better for. Also, next month, maybe I'll give you some, or at the next meeting, I'll give this visibility to you, but John Taflin has gathered a number of entities to try to build a scorecard that we can utilize to communicate to the larger community. And we started to mock that up, and we'll share some drafts with you, John. But I think that's an effort that we're doing in collaboration with not only other economic development organizations, but the chambers. And I think we'll give a good way for the public to see some of the information that the combination of the planning group and ours are constantly working in. The last thing I want to mention is that there was a study that just came out from CEG, and they highlight interesting things from the Capital District. And every once in a while, something in Warren County shows up there. This past quarter, the fastest growing sector in the Capital District for that particular period of time was the marine sector. And the biggest component of the marine sector is obviously Warren County. Marina employment is up 30%. It's the single largest growth of a sector that CEG tracks in the Capital District. And of those more than 300 marina jobs, 90% of them are here in Warren County. It's another one of these insidious things that we don't necessarily see. We think of tourism as primarily hotels and establishments where people eat, maybe even places where people, like the steamship. But people who work on the docks here, 300 people. Obviously, it's a very seasonal business, but those are 300 jobs we don't oftentimes think of. And almost exclusively locals. It's very rare that we are bringing in people from outside the region to do this work, because these are people who have a familiarity with the lake. This is what then creates stress on the rest of the seasonal workforce, because there are some entities where knowledge of the lake is a disproportionate value. I know because I had an intern that I was paying nearly $20 an hour, and I competed hour for hour with a marina for him. And I kept losing because they were happy to pay him time and a half anytime that he was available. And so I struggled to get 20 hours a week, even though he desperately wanted to work for me, simply because there was more viable, more higher paying work available for him on a marina. You'll see some of that announcement in the press, and I just wanted to make sure that you know that we'll give you any of the amount of detail that you want there. The last thing that I wanted to mention to you, in the broadband world, there's a great deal of impact that we're not able to assess in terms of what's going to happen with federal funding. Now, ironically, some of it may be beneficial to us. If there's a shift, for instance, to Starlink playing a much more dramatic and stated role, it's probably well suited to the small pockets of areas that we do not currently have addressed. So there may actually be opportunity for us. But the funding that went behind the large multi-billion-dollar national efforts has been, quite honestly, not effectively spent. It has not resulted in deployment not only here, but in other places, and it is under great scrutiny now. The greatest opportunity that we have for continuing to expand services to continue to incent the private sector that is already here. And that's where we spend an awful lot of our time. We work with as many carriers as possible to try to create the opportunity for there to be competition in as many markets as possible in Warren County. And I believe we're on the cusp of that now. So while it may not be obvious because we're not asking for specific grant funds to do it, the work that we have on broadband that extends the work that you guys do in terms of understanding the numbers and the community that still needs to be met. What we layer on top of that is figuring out how to provide somebody who's already got broadband service with a competitive offering that is fiber-based, perhaps better and cheaper, to as much of our county as possible. We lay that on to also figuring out how to get everyone in the county connected. That work continues. I'm encouraged by where we are, and I'm hopeful that this year you'll see some announcements for greater competitiveness in that market.
All right, thank you. Any other comments from the public? Motion to adjourn. For being Mr. Wild, all in favor of adjourning, please say aye.
So as I look at